Welcome back, everybody. For this episode, I wanted to talk with someone who's an expert in fairy encounters. Because if you really pay attention, encounters with fairies seem to be a lot like what we today call UFOs and aliens. Maybe there's some sort of connection. If you look at UFO stories, you'll see the reverse. A lot of those encounters sound a lot like what people call fairies. So, what's going on? Maybe whoever is visiting us isn't just Jim and Bob from space. Maybe it's something much deeper and much more connected to us and nature than we previously thought. Or maybe we knew it all along. Nevertheless, our next guest is the person to talk to. She spent years chronicling these modern encounters in her podcast, the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, with an incredibly empathetic and respectful hand. And I really am excited for you to hear this conversation because I think these questions and these avenues of research are severely lacking in our modern disclosure conversation. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jo Hickey-Hall to the show. It is so nice to finally meet you. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you. Oh, it's really an absolute pleasure to be here too. And I've been really looking forward to this. I'm glad we finally got space amongst the book writing, which is now just 2 weeks until it goes to print, which is wild.
Wow.
So yeah, kind of reaching the end of a bit of an era of my life.
Yeah, how has that been? I mean, you're talking about your book, Modern Fairy Sightings, which comes out in November, if I'm correct, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's comes out November the 10th. Yeah, it's been kind of 3 years and amongst all the chaos that life brings and the podcast and training to be a psychotherapist at the same time, just because clearly I didn't feel I was busy enough, plus raising a family. So I like to give myself challenges, apparently. Yeah, so it's all good though. I'm really pleased with how it turned out. It's not just a collection of experiences. In fact, it's not a collection of experiences. It's a more of a kind of reflective exploration of what I think might be going on. And I guess I had a few things to say and I got space to say them. So I used that and yeah, looking forward to seeing what people think, really.
That's so awesome. Well, we were kind of touching on this briefly just before we pressed the record button. But I mean, obviously, without spoiling anything in the book, would you be comfortable sharing what you think is going on? Because this, I think your show kind of started around COVID, if I'm correct. And I think that was a big shift for people. Do you think, what do you think is going on?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, it was a big shift for me as well. And the podcast literally just came out of the blue. And I know a lot of your viewers and listeners will recognize that, you know, sometimes in life, suddenly you find yourself on a path and you're just kind of, it's like you're being led down a path, but it feels, it's like it's one foot in front of the other and you feel like you're moving in the right way. And that's kind of what it felt like with the podcast. I'd already had a group that I'd set up in 2016, a Facebook group, and that was just really to provide a space for people to talk about their experiences, because I had had a fairy encounter and I had been studying with Ronald Hutton at University of Bristol, and I'd kind of ended up writing a chapter of magical folk with my colleague at the time, Mark Norman, who's a folklorist. I'm very involved in the Folklore Society, which I'd joined. And so that was kind of the Facebook group was where I tried my best to create a space where people could share and, you know, with each other without it becoming a spectacle. Because I think so often, at least previously, I think it's changed now, but if people start to talk about, you know, fairy experiences, it was the kind of the no-go, the taboo area, either because if people are really into fairies, they might feel that it would be disrespectful to share those stories, but mostly because you're just not taken seriously at all if you share these experiences, and you can sort of then feel very alone with that. So I, having researched for the book, for Magical Folk, which was edited by Simon Young, Dr. Simon Young. So people that are into fairy encounters will know the Fairy Census. And if you haven't, please check that out, because it's chock full of first-hand encounters that have been contributed to the census. And so the Magical Folk was Simon Young's book, and Kerry Holbrook, who runs some really cool projects too. So basically I'd found myself in the situation where we were researching for the book, but actually what was really interesting for me was, as well as the academic things we were looking at about the area, which was Devon that we were looking at, there were people there that actually had their own experiences that they wanted to share. And so it was helpful for me to speak to other people who'd had these first-hand encounters like myself, and felt the same way as I did, that, oh, you know, is it safe to share this with you? Or they would tell me one of their stories and say, I'll tell you another one, but I don't want you to include this because it was just too sensitive for them to share. And I was curious about that. And so the Facebook group provided that space, I felt, quite well, because it was private. And then in 2020, when we had the lockdown, I was working from home. I was working for university at the time, the University of Bristol, and it gave me a chance to meditate in the garden. And because I was working from home, and this idea for the podcast just kept coming, and I was thinking, I should be no idea about podcasts, and I didn't even really listen to podcasts. But it came back so often I couldn't ignore it. So that's kind of how my podcast started. And I think that there very definitely was a shift. I like to think of it as it was a pause when people's routines, ceased in the way that we had known them to. And I think that creates a really powerful space for something else to happen. And I think for a lot of people that did happen, was that it gave them a chance to kind of reflect on their life situations as well. And many of us then ended up doing something different. And, after that, of course, it wasn't all plain sailing for a lot of people. For a lot of people, especially those in the health sector, it was a complete nightmare, and they did not have a chance to sit and meditate in the garden. So I do realise I was in a very fortunate position to have that time. But yeah, we definitely, if we look back, we can sort of see that as a threshold moment, I would say. And even before that, I feel 2016, again, was a big shift for the world. And it got a lot of us kind of awakening around that time, or, as I say, sort of finding themselves on a path, or finding themselves in different situations. So there's that too. So I kind of go into that a little bit in the book, and on what I think about power structures in the world, and how these experiences are viewed by the vast majority of people, and why that might be. But I think people will have to kind of read the book to have a look at that, because I think that, I guess there's kind of a lead up to that. And I think perhaps it's important for people to kind of follow the pace before they're presented with these ideas that may or may not land with people.
Yeah, well, I hope, again, I'm not spoiling anything, but I don't know if you're familiar with George P. Hansen's work, The Paranormal and the Trickster. Yeah, okay.
This is referenced a lot in the book.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe I shouldn't go into it too much, but I mean, I mean, you're saying, okay, well, maybe hopefully this will land. I mean, I think that whole observation of anomalous phenomena happening, as you say, in the threshold or in liminal places or in anti-structural things. You know, I've spent a pretty good amount of time looking for different theories on what might be going on. Like, what are these strange happenings? What's the nature of them? And I don't know if we'll ever know that, but we can certainly figure out the pattern. And they show up in these times. And if you look at individual cases or individual, we call them flaps of UFOs or of odd experiences, it's like at times of anti-structure. And I mean, the COVID era is the perfect example of that. So yeah, I think you're touching
Absolutely.
on something there.
And even with the 2016, we had so many uprisings in the world. You know, if you look back at that, you know, there was that pushback that you go so far with the kind of, because it's sort of anti-bureaucratic as well. And it's all of that, you know, we've reached this kind of crescendo where it's just absolute nonsense. We could kind of feel that it was nonsense. We know that now because you'd have to be have your, you know, head in the sand to not be aware of how just ridiculous the point has got to in the world.
Yeah.
But even then, you know, shifts were happening and pushback was happening too. And I find it fascinating. Just the various sort of strange things that have been going on in the world throughout these times. And, you know, there's something coming up beneath the surface. And it's hard to kind of stay with that bit too, because we see the devastation, the, what's the word? Just the corruption and the foulness of what lies beneath, that we'd maybe sort of kidded ourselves wasn't that way. And yeah, it is that way. And it's been that way for, you know, a long, you know, centuries and centuries, and is the root of a lot of our suffering. And I think that, you know, as I say, something else is breaking through, and it's hard to kind of hold on to the hope in that when we are faced with just the utter, you know, just violence and horror on a daily basis that we are, if we care to look. And so it's about that too, really, and what we can do. And but I can feel, you know, the rising has continued. It's actually just, if anything, has gained more and more momentum. And so I do feel hopeful for the future, and we feel hopeful for humanity, but it's a really difficult time to be living through, and we're the lucky ones, you know, the people that are living through the actual horror. I can't imagine. It's just, yeah. So I feel it's that sort of viewpoint as right, you know, if we open to the divine within ourselves, actually, because I think that's what's happening, is that as we suffer in this way as a global community, we're kind of starting to really recognize the loss and what the causes of that might be, and what we have lost in our relationship with nature, in our relationship with otherworldly beings, and our relationship with the all, you know, source, however you want to see that, the divine, Sky Father, our Father, whatever you know, if you view that to be, nature. And there's a remembering, because in every one of us, I believe, you know, our ancestors will have suffered in some way due to the same sorts of effects in the world, and those great losses. And I think there's kind of this kind of memory in us that is maybe sort of, it's imploring us to reconnect with nature again. And I think that's where these beings are coming through, you know, on this precipice, on this edge.
Yeah, I find that is a recurring theme, not only in just these fairy encounters, but in what people call UFO encounters or quote unquote alien encounters. It becomes this like teaching experience. Like if you really look at what is being done, not just what it looks like or what it says it is, what is being done is like some sort of teaching experience. I mean, do you feel that way as well? I think that's kind of what you're touching on.
Very definitely. And I do have a theory around that and the relationship between, UFOs and fairies, which again, I won't go into now because it's something that I would like to kind of reveal with the book. But yeah, very definitely there's something at play. And, and I'm saying, I don't know, of course I don't know. None of us know. And we'd be foolish to think that we did, especially when you're dealing with, fairies. Because that their nature is that they are vague and we can't pin it down, which is much the frustration of sort of materialism with the way that we live our lives, and that we do like everything to be defined, and it's not. We're living through it. We kind of quite define. But excuse me. But yeah, I agree absolutely that there is the teaching and remembering, and the coming down through the lines is a tricky one, isn't it? Because, what I've always said with my experience is that it's not a kind of special thing in any way, that each and every one of us can feel these connections with the divine. You don't have to have something special within you. This is our nature. It is our kind of psycho-spiritual nature as human beings. But we've been taught to disregard that, diminish that, turn away from that. And I find it very interesting, like you, that often there is this kind of thread where, these experiences have run down through families. Now, you could argue, oh, well, it's about a way of being. If you're brought up with an open-minded family in a certain way of being, or your culture, takes a certain attitude towards these experiences, then of course you're going to be open to it. And that might be true. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes people have experiences and they don't know that their parents have until much, much later, or they would have never thought that their parents had, and yet, they found out that their grandparents did, or something like that. So there's always these, not always, but often these key moments where there's a bit of an aha moment. And I do think there's something in that. And, it is kind of sensitive territory, but we might as well talk about it because it does happen. So, yeah, we've got a lot more to learn about these experiences, I think, and what might be behind them. And that's only assessing it from our human understanding, which probably has nothing to do with anything else, of what's really going on. Who knows? But it still just feels really good above everything to discuss what it feels like when you have these experiences with other people that have them too. And I think for way too long, I found it so frustrating that any discussion around fairies had to start with, oh, but are they real? Are they really real? It's like, look, we're beyond that, or at least a number of us just want to get on and talk about what it's like to experience them. We want to share what it felt like, what meaning it held for us, how things have been different for us afterwards. We want to talk about that. So, our space that we created first with the group, then with the podcast, and now with the Patreon group too, we just really appreciate and are very grateful for being able to exchange with one another. Because, it feels more and more meaningful as we go along in state of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, this is something I really appreciate about your show because on the one hand, you're absolutely correct that for the longest time, anyone who wanted to talk about any sort of anomalous experience, it was, the snicker or behind, like, I don't know about this. But on the other hand, the only people who were talking about this for a very long time brought it into a sensationalist attitude, like very flashy, let's make this about this. You know, if you look into the story of Chris Bledsoe and what was done to him by, I think, the History Channel or something like that, I don't think either of those are helpful, right? You don't want to like disregard or think someone's crazy just because they had this experience you can't fit in a box, but then you don't want to like over sensationalize it. And I don't think you do either on your show. You really just listen to them and you treat it for what it is, which at many times is a very sacred experience, a very, very important point in their lives. And so I think we need more of that in today's day and age.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, because, you know, for the person that is sharing, and for me, I just gain so much. I don't know if it's understanding. I don't know what it is, but it just feels really important to be having these conversations. And it's like it's so vague, but there's an opening. When you hear these stories, and I know it's for listeners too, because I get lots of emails about this, that there's something about these experiences, even if they're very different to what someone else has experienced, there's something about it that speaks to you. And it's like, you know, when you feel the truth in something, you really feel the truth in something. There's like a moment where something can open inside us. And that's kind of the bit. It's not what I'm saying I'm kind of like going in to do, but it's just something I've noticed that happens. And like for me personally, the guest, and then for the the listeners and watchers too. So I really am endeavouring to kind of stay with that. I guess more recently, well, I guess from the beginning really, I speak to researchers too, and we chat around the theory of what could be going on here and all these sorts of things. And I really enjoy that too. But I think the crux of the project is more just let's talk and hear from firsthand from people what their experience is.
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what you say at the beginning of each podcast. It's like, we're going to listen to some fairy stories. Welcome. We're going to listen. And yeah, that's something I don't know if people on my YouTube channel know this, but I have another podcast where I do basically the same thing you do, but for people who have gone through a condition that is under-recognized, called topical steroid withdrawal. And I notice that people just like you, they'll comment and maybe they haven't even had TSW, and they'll be like, wow, like just hearing somebody talking about this, and oh, that makes me think about my cousin who went through this, and now I understand that better. And I get the sense from your channel as well that it's doing this. It has this role in helping people to become more comfortable with this side of reality, and maybe acclimate is a probably better word. And I also wonder if the phenomenon itself is an acclimation process. But yeah, that's a really good point. I think that it allows them to open up to that side of themselves, and with that sometimes comes more. Talking about it, sometimes they remember other experiences from when they were a child, and somehow that then they gain a deeper insight about that. It makes sense to them in a completely new way or a deeper way. And I think the more we do that, it sort of adds to all of our understanding too, and a sort of there's some kind of connectivity. Well, of course we're all connected, but there's something about our shared human experience. It's so somebody talking about their experience feeds into the shared human experience, and we all kind of feel a little ripple of that. So what you're saying about your channel, that really doesn't surprise me. It's important that we get a space to talk about these experiences that not everybody has or understands, but those that do, it's important that they don't feel alone with that, because the reality is they're not
But in the way that we live nowadays, where we are kind of separate, it can feel like that.
I want to make a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. We got a sponsor in the house. Because guess what? If you know me personally, you'll know I'm a sucker for dogs. I always had a dog growing up in the house, and as soon as humanly possible, I'm going to have several little puppies of my own. But in the meantime, when I'm out on the town, I like to watch people walk their beautiful dogs. But, you know, there's one thing I cannot stand, and it is when the human and the dog just don't understand each other. The human is yanking on the dog's throat with that collar, and he's like, come on, we got to go home, buddy. And the dog's like, no, we're going to sniff this. We're not going home. And you can see the tension from hundreds of meters away. I just cringe when I see it. And luckily, this video's sponsor, Compadre, completely eliminates that nonsense. Their custom-fitted omni-no-pull solution, including the illustrious dual attachment, means that the whole dog walking experience completely changes. The Omni No-Pull solution allows you to make gentle corrections around the strongest part of a dog's anatomy, the chest, not the neck, which means that you can guide and train your dog without using painful pinch collars, without using e-collars or choke chains. And the system helps you to gain your dog's attention instead of fight with it. And it establishes actual communication between the two of you. So instead of feeling like walking your dog is a chore, you can both love every walk. If you want to support this channel, head over to compadre.com. That's COMPAWDRE.com to find out for yourself. And when you check out, use code JPT2026 for 10% off your order. Thank you so much, Compadre, for sponsoring the video. Let's get back to the show. There's something I do really want to ask you because I'm confused about this when it comes to fairies. And maybe that's the point. The connection to the dead or the deceased. And that's something I came across when reading W.Y. Evan Wentz's book. You know, there's the Welsh death candle, which sounds like a blue orb, and that people thought would follow the same path that the coffin went during the funeral, and how there were certain people who could speak to their dead relatives or other deceased people. And in UFO experiences, a lot of UFO experiencers have had near-death experiences early in their life. And I'm just curious what sort of things you might have gleaned from that or other weird connections like that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And it's something that I mention in the book, but definitely don't really go into. And I feel like at some point, perhaps I should write an article so I can get right underneath it. But, you know, you mentioned around the wild hunt there, where you have, you know, you'll have the leader of the hunt, which may be the dark man on horseback, but, you know, surrounded by these beastly, perhaps looking creatures, very otherworldly, and they'll go across the land, and they will, of course, take with them anybody that is leaving this realm and going to the next, the human beings. And as you say, you also have these encounters where somebody will have a fairy encounter, go into the other world and see, you know, a relative or a loved one or somebody from their village that had died some years previous, and there they are. And, you know, sometimes the deceased familiar person will warn them not to eat something or to do, you know, give them some tip-offs so that they don't get stuck in the real world. So you have these stories too. So there is this connection between the two. And I think it's very interesting, isn't it? It's like, when we pass into the other realm, we get closer somehow, potentially, to the other realm that fairies exist in. It doesn't feel like it's the same realm. However, we return to an aspect of ourselves that, I mean, the way I like to look at it when I sort of do healing appointments and things is that there's a spirit that comes into this vehicle, you know. People like to call it meat sack nowadays, don't they? in this lifetime, and that you are driving this vehicle. So there's a spirit inside you. And the reason I'm doing this is because I usually see the person in there indigo chakra as like a control room in the driver's seat driving this vehicle. And when we, before we come here, there's an idea that we will come into a lifetime for some reason or another, from some perspectives, from some belief perspectives. And that when we leave at the end, we rejoin with something, we rejoin with source, and that passing through from one to the other, we go into a between place, betwixt and between, a liminal place, which is always where the fairies are. And so it's kind of no surprise, is it, that we may meet them on the way in. I mean, lots of, people recall from when they're very, very young, before they're socialized, that seeing fairies and being with fairies is very natural to them. And again, we have these stories of people being connected with them, when they've passed. So there's definitely a connection there. And, who knows? Joshua Cutchin wrote an excellent book, 2-volume, which I'm sure your watchers, the listeners, will be very familiar with, The Ecology of Souls, which was with, did he write that one with Tim Renner too, or was that Where the Footprints End? I think this was just Joshua, wasn't it?
I don't know,
Ecology
but
of Souls.
I just found out about him, and those are on my reading list because my last video was trying to find out about that connection. And then after I finished the video, I heard about his book. I'm like, man, I definitely need to read that. But yeah, his work seems right on the money with what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And he's your man if you want to, to explore that further, because he's written extensively on it. And, and he actually wrote I have a foreword by Paul Devereaux, who I'm not sure if you will all know so much in the US. I think some of you will. I think he's been on Where Did the Road Go? I'm pretty sure he's been on Where Did the Road. Anyway, Paul was a bit of a legend in that he was looking into all of, things like lays that we know more usually as ley lines, and orbs, anomalous experiences regarding light and potential Earth lights. He was looking into all of this in the 70s, and he's very knowledgeable guy. And so anyway, he's written the foreword to my book, and Joshua's written the afterword, which is absolute delight.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I'm really, really delighted about that. So definitely you must have a chat with Joshua.
Oh, I would love that. I would love to someday earn that conversation. I definitely need to read his book first, just so I know what I'm asking. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'll at least know what I'm asking. But you said something really interesting earlier. We were talking about when we go from this place to the next place, we get into that liminal area, the betwixt in between. And a thought came to my head, if you're in the middle of being and not being, at least as how we categorize it, you get into things that are not being and are not being, and maybe don't make any sense whatsoever, which makes me think about all of the creatures that people see, by the way, in co-locating with UFOs, like, the Bigfoot or the Dog Man. These are things or the Mothman, which was like the bird at the time. These are all things that literally don't make sense. Like, a dog shouldn't be able to walk on 2 legs. The Bigfoot isn't an ape or a human. It's somewhere in between the Mothman or the Birdman. It's the same thing. And, if you talked about how we're kind of driving this meat sack. And for my understanding, I'm a pretty avid video gamer. So like the video game kind of attitude where you're the player playing a character in a simulated world. And I think this was, I forget the gentleman's name who wrote My Big Toe, my big theory of everything. But he's like, what if there are cheat codes You know, like what if one of my cards comes up and it's a Bigfoot and we play this card and see what the character thinks? Do you think, because you've interviewed people who have seen like dogmen and stuff like that, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of tend to group them into them being fairies, as in the original spelling of the word, which is an old French and sort of Middle English term, which is Fairie, fairy. And today we often sort of spell it in other kind of ways, but that was the original spelling, and it originally meant a state of enchantment, and it also meant the place where they reside. So it was a place you were going to fairy, or you have been enchanted. So it meant the kind of place and the state, and then slowly it ended up turning into what we call the beings themselves. And so from that perspective, I kind of gather in, probably for my own enjoyment and, you know, curiosity, I will gather in, you know, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and any other creatures like wolfmen and shadow beings and all of that, because I think it's part of the same experience. It's, you know, these beings, they don't abide by the rules of our material realm, then we don't have to either. And that's where the kind of cheat codes come in. Because if you are looking at things, for instance, like healing, no, they don't follow the rules that we accept to be the norm or accept to be the limitations of what is possible within our understanding of this realm, except they're not contained by those rules, and neither are these beings. So when we step outside of ourselves, we are neither kind of being nor not being. For instance, if we are meditating, for instance, you can reach that state of presence where something that's been happening for me a lot recently is I'll see an eye. Now, I don't know what it's about, but it's just one single eye. And if I get to that sort of depth of my meditation and I have that presence, I find it helpful to me. There's something about the depth of that then gives me a better experience or a touch into something, and I feel better for it. I think that, you know, in that moment, I'm neither being nor not being. Something around that. So, you know, I feel that's where we can meet them. So on some occasions when I've been in deep meditation, on one particular occasion, that maybe we can talk about that actually as the one that you want to talk about at the end. Maybe perhaps I can talk about that one. I was meditating and a tall kind of glowing male presence came into the space that I was meditating in. And so I was somewhere where it was possible somehow to see or connect with this being. That's my understanding of it. I don't know. So I think that we can access these states through, you know, internally and in the depth of our being, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a question. So we've talked about how in that state of being, both historically and experientially, you can encounter things like that. What about people who seemingly, and I want to emphasize that, seemingly don't want to have an experience, don't expect an experience, but something reaches out to them? I can think of a few cases where, like, this man in Texas, I think in 2007, was just out watching his dog go poop in the yard or something. And he looks up and there's this like object just floating there and he videotaped it. It clearly does not look like a balloon or anything. Maybe I'll remember the name and after post and edit and put it up in here. But
I looked at it for a while and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. So what I did, I ran inside to my house. I had the camera, my video camera, sitting there by the TV. And I grabbed it real quick because I had used it on Easter Sunday with my family. And I let it sit right there for a while. So what I did, I brought the camera, and the dog, Chuito here, he was here, as well as the other dog. And when I noticed the object, I grabbed my camera immediately, and I started to videotape from that angle. But he was growling. He was like, and I said, and I just petted him, but I couldn't talk. I didn't know what to say. I was just speechless, like they say. So what came to my mind, videotape, keep the camera going. So I'm out here, and I'm videotaping, and I'm trying to hold on to the dog.
Things like that, where things come here. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it happens a lot. And and I, if I were talking to him, I would ask, what was going on in your life at the time? Because we can have those moments where we are moving either from one job to another, one relationship maybe to another, or, we can be having these moments where we're not quite one thing, we're another. It happens a lot. You mentioned George P. Hansen. If people want to look into things further, they can look at Victor Turner's work and Arnold Van Gennep's work on, liminality and the rites of passage. And in our lives, we have, from childhood into puberty, or from, when we're getting married, or, baptized, or, so of course when we die and when we're born, hugely. Which again ties into what we were talking about before, those threshold moments where it's the not being quite one state or another. There's an openness to that where we can have these experiences. But often people don't necessarily tie it to that until you start talking to them about it and you start to inquire. And then they say, oh yeah, actually, this was happening at the time. It was quite a big moment in my life. I hadn't really tied that to that before, but there's always something. It's rarely that they can't pinpoint it. And sometimes they can't pinpoint it, but they might contact me some weeks later and say, well, I remembered this thing, and actually this makes sense to me. So the universe itself has those threshold moments. We have the dawn and dusk. We have the cycles of the year, solstice and Beltane, and so all the quarters and cross quarters, your solstices and your equinoxes, and then you've got your Imbolc, Beltane, Lunar Lammas, and Halloween or Samhain. So that's doing its own thing too, which is, I think it's really encouraging to see that a lot of places, certainly over here, and I think over there as well, a lot of villages are picking up old customs or reinventing new customs that acknowledge and, do something to celebrate those points of the year, because they're really important. So for a person that's experiencing that, I'd ask, well, what time of day was it? Because the liminality of dusk, for instance, or dawn could have an effect on that. What were they experiencing emotionally at the time too? So I think for some experiences, certainly my own on at least one occasion was down, I would say that was tied to my strong emotional states at the time. So yeah, it's something to look at.
Well, this is something I really wish that is more incorporated into modern studies of anomalous phenomena, not just UFOs, but all of it. Because you'll see more dated investigations into some of the most fascinating cases. Like MUFON would go and explore this case here, and they'll ask about what the size of the object was, all of the really important scientific questions, to try and triangulate where this thing was, whether it be a UFO or a creature or whatever it is. And try to cancel out if it was a balloon or a plane or a hallucination. What was your medication at the time? But very seldom would they have the knowledge that someone like you would have to ask those questions. And I think if we had done that from the start, like if we had, not tabooized these things from the beginning and listened to people more like Jacques Vallée and started incorporating those things, we might have had better answers. And that's really the crux of my channel, is like we've gotten to the point materialistically where people have sworn under oath for Congress saying that they have seen documents, they have seen craft, they have seen this and that, and they've testified in skiffs, but we don't seem to have a good understanding of what is going on. And I think it's becoming increasingly aware that maybe even the people who have more information behind a secrecy wall might not even know either. And I wonder what would happen if we asked those questions from the beginning to people like Lonnie Zamora or people at Roswell, and just see, maybe we would understand more.
Maybe. I mean, I think, it's a really good point. And people like you and I have been frustrated with the status quo and the way that things have been viewed for a long time. However, we are in the minority, or were in the minority. I think we're gathering pace. And I think that perhaps, as a collective humanity, we just weren't ready. There was some kind of flickers here and there. And I think all of those flickers, including the sort of 60s, where we were definitely experimenting more with other realities and other states of being, or rediscovering and reconnecting with that. I think it's all been working towards something, and I think that something is what's happening now, because I think we are in the thick of it now. And I think, I had a chat with Brother Richard recently about Garabandal.
I saw that one.
Garabandal, I'm not sure how that's this be pronounced, but that I'm just really, I think about that quite a lot, because I feel that things are ripe now for something to happen of that magnitude. Excuse me. I think it's kind of, we're on the precipice of something. And so I think that there's a sense that almost as if we can feel that coming and we're ready, because we know we can't go on like this much longer anyway, or at least anyone that's, noticing what's going on in the world and caring about that has reached a point where they realise we can't go on like that. And so, I think that we are now at the point where we can think about these experiences in a different way. So everything is just amazingly timely, isn't it? As it always is. And I'm very curious to see how the rest of this year and the years to follow play out.
Yes. Yeah, we've got the Chris Bledsoe prophecy or whatever, and all these people talking about different dates and stuff. And I'm not betting anything on those things, but I'm very curious as well. Do you think that this, you were talking about being ready for something, and I do agree with you. We're more ready now than we were certainly in decades past. But, you touch on this before, you've touched on this in other podcasts in this conversation, that in times past, before the kind of Cartesian split, this is our nature. We understood the sort of hierarchy, not hierarchy, but I guess relationship with other places and things. Do you think us being ready now is a humanity long process, or do you think it's like a coming back to where we were? Because you've said this before, that there's always been corruption and stupidity and power structures and stuff like that. Like, what's your read on that?
Yeah, I think that, if you look at the different ages, for instance, there's lots of different ways you can look at this. And from a sort of a healer perspective, we have been, I don't know sort of what would make more sense to your listeners. But if we think of it as a kind of an age-wise, we've been in the age of Pisces for 2,000 years. So there's that way to look at it, where you can look at the yugas, which I couldn't actually go into detail about the yugas, but I know that it ties into my understanding of the different ages, or is similar to, where we're coming into the age of Aquarius. So there's that sort of thing. There's kind of an evolution, if you like, of humanity. And from my healing training back in the day, it kind of has given me the following perspective, which is that we've been working our way through, and the Piscean age, which is the last 2,000 years, has been about sort of getting to know ourselves as individuals. It's about the individual. It's also solar plexus, power, control, and freedom issues, which we can see, and it's the kind of mentality where, this is mine and that's yours, over that this is mine, and putting boundaries around things. It's the kind of mentality where one sees themselves as better or worth more than the other, which would give rise to this, colonialism, for instance. And the treatment of people, the continuing treatment of people to this day. And I think that we are breaking in through to the Aquarian age, which, again, from the sort of healing perspective and chakra understanding, that would be moving into the heart area. So you think, think about the solar plexus being, the power center, power, control, and freedom, identity, how I see myself, how others see me. We have been, especially in modern times, really exploring our identity. I mean, even things like, psychotherapy and the spiritual seeking, all of that is a kind of, perhaps not so much spiritual seeking, but the mind, the intellect, all of that is solar plexus energy, which a lot of it is really positive, through these, exploring rationalism, and through, logic and mental intellect, we're able to speak to each other on this computer. You're on the other side of the world to me, absolutely brilliant technology that we've managed to create. But the flip side of that is the darker side of what solar plexus brings. And if we're moving towards, as I believe, a heart chakra, where I am you, you are me, and that this is something that we come to realize, that we are all connected. It's more about acceptance. It's also including in the I am you and you are me. We're looking at nature. We're looking at everything living that exists around us, and realizing that, oh my goodness, we are part of everything. How could we ever have thought that we were so separate? How? And reaching that point from a place of solar plexus where things are in balance, then that's easier. So, but if you have gone through your life really believing, no, I am better than that person there, and no, it's right for me to own this and for you not to, and the sense of separation of seeing somebody as less than you because they're different in some way, all of these things, to reach a point of heart where I'm you and you are me, is such a big jump for people to make, that you can imagine the rupture. You can imagine the ego death that someone would have to go through to reach this point. And yet we're seeing that with countries and cultures happening too. They're moving from solar plexus to heart chakra, and the huge rupture involved in that, and the huge hanging on to that old way of being. I'd say the solar plexus being the older way of being, because they can't imagine any other way to be than to hold on to all of their power. And yet it's happening. And so I think, I'm trying to remember what your question was now, but I think that's my viewpoint of it. Is that what was your question again? Just make.
I mean, I think you answered it. I mean, it's just, my question was more about, what's this process, and is it a lifelong process? And I think you kind of intimated that it is a humanity long process, and that, just like I kind of, a better answer that I could really hope for, which hints that there's an underlying system that the ancients knew that we are out of touch with, that there's some sort of, inner calendar system, perhaps with denizens that we are disconnected with, that kind of are middle management beings in this, whatever this reality is. And things are afoot whether we like it or not, no matter how much money we accumulate, no matter how many views we get, which is the currency now, or how much data we're able to mine. So I think that's a very interesting answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hey, thank you so much, Jo Hickey-Hall. I really appreciate speaking with you. I feel like I could go on forever, but we got to end it here. And this was really awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed chatting with you. And, you've brought so much to this conversation also that that I found very helpful too. So yeah, thanks so much for asking me. And I'll speak to you again soon sometime.
I would love that. That would be great. Take care of yourself.
Cheers then, you too.